Reversing the Great Game, Pakistan's Pivot. I'd like to invite our moderator for this session, Moeed Pirzada, to come on stage and welcome the panelists. Moeed Pirzada is a Pakistani political commentator and TV journalist. He currently works as Director of World Affairs and lead anchor person for PTV News. I'd like to invite our panelists to come on stage, Mr. Ikram Sehgal, Ms. Huma Baqai, and Asif Yasin Malik.
Hi. Wherever you want to. Sure, you want to? I mean, it's a free seating arrangement. So I guess we can start, or we have to. We can start, or we have to wait. We can start. So a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the to the 6th Oxford Literary Festival. It's a great happening in Islamabad. Long time ago it used to happen in Karachi. Islamabad was missed out of it. So I'm very glad that this event continues to take place in Islamabad. I'm Moeed Pirzada. Many of you are familiar with me. I'm a television anchor. I'm not with PTV. I'm with 92 News. I'm also a columnist. I am a publisher. I'm an editor of an online publication, Global Village Space, which also brings out a magazine, print magazine. And my panelists are well known, but I want to introduce them along with the topic. The topic is very provocative, reversing the great game, Pakistan's pivot. This term, almost all of you are familiar with the term great game, but in many ways, and much has been written about it, much has been discussed about it. It has been debated endlessly for the past almost more than 100 years. But in many ways, the term is still a mystery. It's a very intriguing term. The term was first used by young British military officers who were based in Kabul in their semi-official sort of correspondence. The term was immortalized by the famous English writer, novelist Rudyard Kipling in his book Kim, in 1901, after which the term became almost global, international, has been written much about it. The term actually meant that the British Empire wanted to create a buffer, the autonomous tribal areas between Pakistan and Kabul, as a buffer between the imperial Tsarist Russian Empire and the British Empire. And much has been written about it. But to this day, the Russian writers have asserted that this was only a British paradigm. There wasn't really a plan by the Russians to conquer India or to come toward the Arabian Sea. The 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and then the subsequent Pakistani, American and Saudi military effort along with the Afghan Mujahideen was essentially predicated on the assumption that Russians are about to pass through Pakistan toward the warm waters, the Arabian Sea. And in 1979 and 1980, there was a very popular book, which now we know was actually a work of Central Intelligence Agency, The Next Domino, which is not available anymore. In the Next Domino, it was claimed that Pakistan is the target and the Russians would go toward the warm waters. In subsequent revisionist research, jointly between the American academics and the Russians who joined each other in conferences and seminars in 1990s. It's more or less believed the Russians were only interested in stabilizing Afghanistan because of its implications of an unstable Afghanistan for the Central Asian Soviet republics, which were then Soviet Union. And they never had any serious intent of reaching toward the warm water. But that's the sort of a history. In September 2018, a young scholar of Pakistani origin, Kamal Alam, probably was his name, who was then working with Royal United Services Institute, which is an official think tank of the British government in London, came up with a paper which was published at RUSI's official site, which claimed that the Pakistani state and the military is now reversing the great game, pivoting Pakistan, changing the pivot, and it's engaging Russian military in an increasingly cooperative framework. Is it really happening? And if it's happening, what are its implications? This should be the starting point of our discussion. First of all, sir, before I introduce you, can all of you hear us at the back? Can you hear us at the back? Are you okay with that? Thank you. So to my left is Ikram Sehgal Saab. He's a very noted author, defense columnist and writer. All of you familiar with him, known for his book, Escape from Oblivion. The interesting thing for Ikram Sehgal Sahab to be in this discussion is this, that 3 years before Kamal Alam raised this issue of reversing the great game, Ikram Sehgal had actually talked about that in East West Institute in New York, which was then headed by Cameron Munter, the ex-US ambassador to Pakistan. So this is a very interesting point from that. Next to Ikram Sehgal Sahab is Huma Baqai. Dr. Huma Baqai is Professor of International Relations at Institute of Business Administration in Karachi. Very warm welcome to her. And next to is General Asif Yasin Malik Sahab, who has been not only the ex-Secretary Defense, but has also been the co-commander Peshawar, and that is, the Peshawar co-commander is an institution that looks towards Afghanistan. So very warm welcome to all of you once again. Ikram Sehgal sir, with this introduction that you already predicted 3 years before, Kamal Alam basically said that General Bajwa is actually doing it. And General Bajwa only took charge in 2016, and you mentioned that in 2015, the reverse of the great game. What were you thinking at that time?
Actually, I think it was not done as a policy. It was by default. The default occurred because, if you remember, there was the old Baghdad Pact. The Baghdad Pact had Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Iraq at the beginning, and thereafter that was 1954, 1958, Iraq went out of it. This became Central Treaty Organization, supported by the United States and the Western powers, basically as a wall against Soviet Union and China.
And China.
And China, Communist China. And this was not new. In fact, this was coming in from earlier. And, even though the Russians now say that there was no intention about having anything as a great game and all, they spent a lot of money not planning it, a lot of money and effort not planning this, because all the time they were sending in a lot of spies, a lot of people, etc., into these areas, etc. So basically it was to protect the Middle East oil. The Arab countries which had Middle East oil, etc., CENTO was formed. CENTO fell apart in 1959 and 1979, and thereafter when it fell apart, Iran went away. The components then stayed in a loose economic framework called the Regional Cooperation for Development. It is not even a military organization. Now, I'm not going to skip over and see the situation now. Iran is, of course, in the bad books of the West, United States especially. Turkey, well, is beyond a fail-safe line in that sense. Right? It's still a member of NATO, but it faces a lot of problems. And Pakistan, of course, has been faced with sanctions and has been the subject, despite the fact that we were considered a most, let us say, reliable, favorite ally of the United States. Pakistan, from every 10 years, from being the cornerstone of United States foreign policy, we became the gravestone of United States foreign policy. It happens almost 10 years, from 70 to 80, 80 to 90, it's been happening.
Is it about to happen again?
It's maybe about to happen again. So, you have had this, by default, you have the situation where you were already relying on China, and you turned also to the Russians, and I'm sure Lieutenant General Yasin Malik would be better equipped to answer that question. But we had to fulfill a lot of our defense needs right? And we had to look for that thing, etc. And at the same time look beyond defense needs to economic needs to political needs, etc. So China was instrumental both in encouraging us in this, and China was instrumental in encouraging the Russians in this. And they created the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, basically, which, if you look at it, it's a sort of a, sort of a reverse to that. At the same time,
but that was in 2005 or 4.
Yeah, it was starting, but when it started, all these things started happening together almost simultaneously. Different things started coming together. But what really actually triggered it all off was the One Belt, One Road initiative, which was started much earlier. I mean, it is now called the One Belt. Karakoram Highway was planned in the 60s.
1966.
1960s. And therefore, it was in the works for a long time. With the One Belt, One Road, just look at the figure. First of all, Europe and Asia are one continent. It are not two continents. It is Eurasia. Only the Ural mountains separate the two. Now, if today's road and link from Shanghai to Calais, it would take you 15 days at most. And if you go by the sea link, it will take you 45 days.
Really?
So, and now, with a network of roads coming up, 16 days actually 9 days to some places, 16 days to Gwadar, etc. It changes the entire scope. Now, in the olden days, the economic thing were protected by the sea fleets. Like, for example, why did World War II come about? World War II came about because United States and Britain denied access to the resources to the Japanese. The Japanese had no choice,
right,
but to open up they had to go to World War II.
Okay.
Today, similarly, the 7th Fleet and the 5th Fleet dominate the Pacific and this thing. But with the Belt Road Initiative, both the 7th Fleet and 5th Fleet become irrelevant to a certain extent.
Okay.
Right. They could well be on a pleasure cruise because the road and railway line exists.
Okay. Yeah. So let me bring Dr. Huma Baqai. So Dr. Huma Baqai, do you think that is there any serious rapprochement taking place between Islamabad and Moscow? Some of the Russian diplomats I've been speaking in the last couple of months thought privately off the record that Pakistanis have highly exaggerated the importance of the joint military exercises, Daruba and all that. And if you look at in 2018, India is very conscious of the change in power dynamics if Russia seriously engages with Pakistan. So the Indian decision to buy S-400 missiles, which is in fact I think a $5 billion project, limits Russia's possibility to engage with Pakistan. So you think Moscow and Pakistan are engaging or just posturing?
Frankly speaking, when I sort of look at it, I would not want to compartmentalize it into the kind of military relationship that India has had with Russia. Because I think then we would perhaps not be looking at the larger picture. If you look at the larger picture, I see it in the context of how the geopolitical reality of this region is changing. And while you were introducing this topic, you spoke about the whole concept of pivot as it was introduced. But perhaps to me, it was in 1948 that Quaid-e-Azam said that Pakistan is going to be a pivot state. And when I see that, I say that when there is a conflict that unfolds in this region, twice, Pakistan is a frontline state. And now when an economic initiative is unfolding in this region, Pakistan is a frontline state. It happens by this engagement does not happen for the love of Pakistan. This engagement happens because of the way it's located. So the reversal of the game, if you want to call it that, is essentially how power realignment is taking place in this region. So perhaps what I would like to say and be more provocative than you have been is that we are probably witnessing the unfolding of the new Cold War in this region right here. I mean, I think we're going through history-making events. And when we say that, it is of course going to be very different from the Cold War of the past, the one we lived through, because this is going to be a crisscross of geoeconomics and geopolitics. So although you see a China-US rivalry and a trade war, but at the same time you also see that the economic integration is such that Chinese economic growth at 8-9% is impossible without American consumption. And the low-cost consumption that America is used to, it cannot happen without mass Chinese production. Same is the situation with India. While all of this is going on and we're seeing this convergence between New Delhi and Washington, and the whole concept of India being sort of put up as a bulwark to the rise of China in this region and being cultivated by Washington, the seventh trade dialogue between China and India has unfolded, and they continue to pursue that. They remain the largest trade partners. So this crisscross of geoeconomics will just make this whole construct of the new Cold War a bit different. What is perhaps also different is that I see it happening on the sea lanes. And when I see it happening on the sea lanes, the maritime powers will just play a more important role than any other. And then finally, you see, we talk about the pivot, but Pakistan is also called something else, and this is a comment that is constantly coming up. And that comment is that Pakistan is the zipper between Eurasia. The zipper state between Europe and Asia is Pakistan. And if that is the case, whether the game is played this side or that side, we remain a pivot state. So that is my submission here. And it's not for the love of Pakistan. This happens because of the compulsion of the location that there is. And I see a very new assertive China, a China when the day US puts most depleting sanctions on Iran, China announces, what, 22 billion investment?
No. It's going to be 300 billion.
Yes, investment in China, in Iran's oil infrastructure. That again is a very long-term zipper Euro-Asia construct, because what is happening in the Middle East, what is China trying to do? And China has a very, very geo-economic focus. It is making sure that if oil supplies get disrupted from the Middle East, it is now investing today while we are thinking about what we are going to do. It's already started investing, put its forces in Iran to make sure the oil supplies remain there. So I think the king tomorrow is somebody who can win the geoeconomics game. And I think that is the game China has just emerged to be very good at. And Russia sees this nexus will allow it to rise with China. And so if cultivating Pakistan means it's going to be there in the front row, it's going to cultivate Pakistan. So it's not about a myth or a reality. It is how the situation is unfolding on the ground.
Okay, John sir, both of your participants are very optimistic about the new geoeconomics, which is shaping the geostrategy, the trade links, the commercial ties that reduces the trucking and the railroad distance between China and Calais, which is a French port facing Dover, to literally 15 days. And Huma similar shares these kind of views, but there is a counter view, if I can be provocative. The counter view is this, that Pakistanis have been declaring the great game of the CPEC, or the game changer of the CPEC from 2014 onwards. And there are hundreds of Pakistanis that have written the obituary many times over of United States status in the region as a superpower, when in the last 12 months we have seen, it is believed that Pakistan had no other option but to curry back to Washington to save itself from FATF, to balance out the IMF, to save its economy, and also there are conscious efforts of creating a balance between Beijing and Washington. And people who are coming back from Beijing, they tell me that Beijing is also now thinks that CPEC is going slow, because they have many concerns and sort of disappointments what are happening in the past 12 months. So what's your take on this optimistic view then, the being us the pivot and United States only for luxury liners, 7th Fleet and 5th Fleet?
Thank you. I think first of all, let's understand what is a pivot. Pivot is nothing itself. Pivot is something which is used by everybody as a marker.
As an anchor.
As an anchor, as a marker.
Right.
So the marker doesn't have many choices. It is the users who have the choice.
Right.
If they take some bypass or something, they avoid the pivot. So, but we are sort of, historically, we are an unavoidable pivot, if I may say so. And I say so because probably India, historically, is the most invaded country in the world. And always invaded from one direction.
North.
North, west. You know, this same Kabul and Central Asia and so on. So therefore, the Russians also were following the same historical sort of a thing. Now coming over to the Russian and Chinese comparison, if I may say, the Chinese have all different sort of scales of time of work. When Chinese say short term, it may mean about 25 years. And when they say middle or time, it may be 50 years. And long time is maybe 100 years. And as Ikram Sahab said, the foundation of this Belt Road was laid by KKH. It was, the West doesn't like to acknowledge it, it's one of the marvels of engineering.
Yes.
The terrain through which it was made and the human cost. At that time it was 1 person per kilometer who had died.
Right.
So if you measure it, so that is how the Chinese have always thought and looked. Now, my view is that we were all looking towards the Soviet Union as a great game. The great game is now unfolding from eastern side, the Chinese. Look what they are doing in Africa now.
Right.
You know, they have gone in like honeybees into Africa. And they're, you know, after every country in China, in Africa, you'll find the Chinese. Now, if you link this belt and road through Pakistan, you will see the best accesses to Africa more important than to Europe.
But is it really happening? I mean, we've been talking of this linking.
It is happening. China is in a big way in Africa. And Africa had been shunned by the West. All the invading powers, France, Portugal, all those, Spain, Netherlands, even Germans, they left Africa as a bad game. But the Chinese found it to be there. Now, as far as 6th and 7th fleet is concerned, 5th and 7th, I think the Chinese are not blind about it. They have launched 2 aircraft carriers. They are already into it. They had a priority which they have always told Pakistanis, that put your house in order economically, then you can do it militarily. This is exactly what they have done. In the last 30 years, they have done, you know, wonders in economic progress. So having now stabilized the economy of China, they are now going in a very big way towards the military development. They have developed already a stealth fighter plane, which will beat probably all the fighters. Because the Chinese start from where everybody is finishing.
Right.
They have the advantage of today. So therefore, I think the new game emerging will be a Chinese great game. If they are linking to Calais or Dover, it is more to the benefit of the Chinese than to the benefit of Dover or Calais. So this is what they are trying to do. And Pakistan was seen as a pivot then also and would remain as a pivot. वो जो कहते हैं ना हमारी जियो स्ट्रेटेजिक लोकेशन कभी बहुत अच्छी होती है, कभी अजाब भी बन जाती है.
Can I just add
Sure.
one small sentence here? Because General Saab brought in the African construct. You see, we are all victims of the US info war. So all the information that we get and the resultant mindsets that we have is because of this bombardment of information that comes our way, which becomes our reality and is supposed to be credible. So this whole debate about the debt trap, even today, as we sit here and talk, and he talked about Africa, Africa still owns more to these Western countries than it will ever own to China. And moreover, the investment in Pakistan under One Belt, One Road is peanuts compared to the investment that China has done in Europe, where now it controls 10% of their ports. 10% of ports in Europe means that we are actually looking at that zipper between Eurasia. But what is important, perhaps, if you just give me 2 minutes, is that France and some other European countries have stopped China from building more in Europe. And they say that please, let's have a rule-based engagement before we move any further. And I think that's where the cue lies for countries like Pakistan. This engagement is good. This is good for us. We're done with the way the West is exploitative and intrusive when aid and assistance comes. So when China does not interfere in internal affairs, that's a breath of fresh air. But at the same time, it's not going to protect your interest. You're going to protect your interest yourself. So when I think we take our clue from Europe, where they're now talking about rule-based engagement, and China is pushing a win-win situation. Win-win is fine, but that win-win can change any time into win-lose. So rule-based is what we should be perhaps looking at. My 2 cents.
Okay, I'll just talking to the audience in the sense that let us open a quick second round of questions with the panel, and then we'll open up for the your question answers, and you can be ready with your questions. Yes, quick one.
A small point, the slow progress of CPEC in Pakistan, we are attributing it to American pressure and whatnot. What I have been constantly looking at about CPEC in Pakistan is it was on our end, Pakistan's end, very, very miserably planned and executed.
Right.
And we were, calling it a game changer for Pakistan. I have heard Chinese ministers saying it is not a game changer for you, it is a game changer for China.
Right.
So we have always projected that they are doing us a favor by passing through Pakistan. No, it is not like that. Overall, it's for the mutual interest. But basically, when CPEC goes into a shape that it has been planned for, China is likely to benefit over $120 billion a year. And we have put whole of CPEC under a loan or a debt system. We should have at best spent 10%, and rest 90% should have been spent by the Chinese. So
right.
We fell for it when it was being planned.
No, definitely. I wanted to come to you to respond to this. A Chinese diplomat, very well placed, said to me off the record that Pakistanis have created a very exaggerated strategic dimension around CPEC. Though CPEC was purely an investment to help Pakistani economy. And he mentioned that the cost and freight of a container between Gwadar and Western China is still more than the cost of freight between a destination somewhere close to Gwadar and the port of Henan, which is the entry on the east coast of China. So it said it is not economically really taking off. So maybe the Pakistani optimism has to be really examined a bit realistically.
Okay. Before you ask me the next question, I think I'm probably the only one in this audience or in the secret that has actually worked on the KKH.
That worked for?
Worked on the KKH, the Karakoram Highway project.
Okay.
In 1970, I was flying a helicopter attached to the People's Liberation Army, which was constructing the road. Right. So I stayed with 6 months with them, and like you said, it was a great road. But the point is, a lot of people died on that road, making that road. And my job was, other than liaison, was flying a LOA-3 helicopter, was to carry the injured to base hospitals and things like that. One particular harrowing day, when a lot of people were injured, and my interpreter had flown in actually from Beijing, from the Beijing University, directly. So he was with me for some time, and I was there, and I had blood on my overalls, and I said, why are you Chinese doing this? This is a road from nowhere to nowhere. And, you're stupid. So he kept looking at me and he said, no, you Pakistanis are stupid. You say, you think in terms of 5-10 years, we think in terms of 50-100 years. We will be down to Karachi. There was no Gwadar at that time. He said, we will be down to Karachi, then I'll ask you. Well, Mr. Cheng, who was my interpreter, rose up to be the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan in 2003. And he could speak fluently Urdu, he could curse in Punjabi very fluently. And he used to ring me up every year and sing, "Who is stupid?" So the point is, if anybody Chinese comes and tell you it's not in their strategic interest, it is bull. It is their strategic interest.
It's a manipulation.
It is a manipulation. And I want to just say this, that as far as the CPEC is concerned, in the first $46 billion, $36 billion worth of projects are almost complete, the power projects. The $10 billion worth of infrastructure road are quite well on the way to completion, right? A lot of work has taken place. What has not taken place is maybe things which are now coming into line, like the railway line and certain other factors. It's that thing, but a lot of work has taken place. Where the difference has been that the new government has placed more emphasis on socio-economic things, health, education, etc., rather than the projects that they had, which was infrastructure projects. So I think there's a perception of the thing. And I just want to add something what John Saab said here, and Huma. You know, we have an identity crisis. We are South Asians, we are Middle East, and we are Central Asians. We are, by default, we are the pivot, right? It suits us not to be in any camp. Because can we afford to be in the Iranian camp at the cost of Saudi Arabia, or in the Saudi camp at the cost of Iran, right? So we have to pay something on a fail-safe line where we must take our situation and make sure that we use that to our advantage from both the worlds, whether it's Chinese or whether it's American, right? We don't want to be part of the great game. We want to be objectively use that the potential that we have, that geopolitical position or geoeconomic position that we have, to make sure that we take full advantage of it.
Dr. Huma Baqai, you teach international relations at Institute of Business Administration, Karachi, which is a very prestigious institute, and you've been teaching IR for a number of years. When Pakistanis very excitedly talk of the game changer, that means the game changer means is going to change some reality that already exists. If one side is trying to change a reality through game-changing action, then the other side has to react as well. Much less is known about how, in Pakistan especially, as to how the other side is trying to counteract or respond to this so-called game changer.
Before she says something, I must apologize to Lieutenant General Talat Masood, because he was keeping our helicopters flying at that time in KKH. Thank you.
I don't know, I really don't know, Moeed, how to respond to that. Because I keep coming back to this thing Ikram Sehgal just said, that is this about this conspiracy mindset that we have? That even when something good is happening, we're like, why is this good happening to us? This shouldn't happen to us. There's something wrong somewhere. So, you know, when the Chinese were coming, we were all like, okay, they're giving us this money, they must be wanting something in return, you know. So we have this...
Will they not be looking for something in return?
This is this constant second-guessing syndrome that we are plagued with. I mean, we just can't imagine that we are important, we can be cultivated, we can play an important role. So all of that. So day before yesterday, everybody was telling poor Imran Khan, don't speak extempore, speak from a scripted speech, you're going to mess it up. So he does this speech, and the next day everybody says, wow, you did a great job. And then you have another set of people who say, this is 2 days glory and it's going to fizzle out because you have to walk your talk. Of course you have to walk your talk. You have to walk your talk whether you make a speech in the United Nations, and you have to walk a talk where you make your commitments to a country who's investing when nobody wanted to invest in you. What was your ground reality when China offered you the One Belt, One Road initiative? Let's be honest. You were abandoned by the United States at that time. You were in practical diplomatic isolation, and your economy was nosediving. That was your reality. And there is this country which comes with bags full of money and say, I trust you and I will invest you and I will allow you to revive. Do you really think, Moeed, we're in a position to say, please, why are you doing that? I mean, seriously, give me a break. And I think that's what we've become.
But the problem with this argument is that you're saying the Chinese are doing it as a result, as some sort of charity? As
No, I don't think there are no free lunches.
Okay, so
and
what's the
there
quid
are
pro
no
quo?
permanent friends and no permanent enemies in international relations. That's
So-
rule number one. There is some very important convergence that exists
Yes.
between Beijing and Islamabad, which emanates out. They've done a very, very serious cost-benefit analysis here.
So what's the quid pro quo?
The quid pro quo is the game reversing, the US realizing that you're going into the China, into the eastern camp. You just spoke about Mr. Munter. You know, I was in a session with Mr. Munter. He says, look, I want you to warn about all of this that China is doing, but we can't do that for you.
And just want to add that, you know, we take it from, we take the distances from the Chinese ports. The Xinjiang province, southwest China, was totally underpopulated. It was desolate. It was not well. The thing. China has been investing billions, hundreds of billions of dollars there to address things.
Yes, I mean,
and
that's true.
that is closest. The Chinese ports are the furthest away. They're 2-3 times the distance from there to Gwadar.
And
right?
they follow the Chinese. Let's look at from the Chinese perspective. They follow a very, very inclusive economic development model. It is their compulsion. One party rule cannot go on. They need the 10 to 12% growth rate, and for that they need to lift these provinces. I've seen some of you in the audience must have been to China. If you go to Beijing, you go to Cologne, you go to other parts of China, those parts do not need any upliftment. They're as good as any Western capital in the world. It is this part of China that leads the upliftment, and of course it gives China the global strategic footprint. Pakistan is the first corridor among 6 other corridors. Yes, it is looking for a global footprint. Yes, it is going to challenge the United States. Yes, United States is very, very skeptical of it. But like I said, it's a crisscross of geoeconomics and geopolitics. The economic convergence is by compulsion. The geostrategic will happen by default.
Okay, last question before we take the questions from the audience. But first, I want to share something with Dr. Huma Baqai, with the audience. I know Ambassador Cameron Munter very well as a friend, and he has been forced out of the East-West Institute because of the fact that he was seen as pro-China, soft on China. He had an intellectual paradigm that China should be looked favorably for international growth, and the other people who were part of the East-West funders basically made him out, and he had to resign. He had to leave the East-West Institute because he was considered a sinologist and a pro-China. But
I won't take you on that.
you want to take me on that?
Yes, because I'm a director of East-West Institute.
Yeah, but so what's
Yeah,
the
and
what's
I
the
know
view?
No, he was not
Because-
forced. He left on his own because he wanted to do something about it. All right.
But that's a
And
subsequent explanation.
And you can ask him this. Day after tomorrow, he is a guest of the Karachi Council of Foreign Relations. He's in Karachi now, and the thing you can ask him point blank this question. He was not for that reason. He wanted to pursue his own this thing. He spent 6 years in the East-West Institute. He did very well, right? And he just said we want to. And he
I can't mention who said to me.
Yeah.
But
I'm
of
just trying
course
to
he
explain
has
you
to say this
that
thing. He's doing other things.
As a director, and by the way, he's also chair of the South Asia program.
But are you
of East-West Institute today?
But Sehgal sir, are you suggesting there were no fault lines inside the East-West on the issue of China?
There were fault lines. There are issues of fault lines on India, on this thing, etc. We've got already with India. You know, they showed a nuclear distinct threats, and they had Iran and Korea there on top of there. And I said, thank God for this that Pakistan is not there on the thing. But the point is that as far as and just to give you an idea, Cameron Munter today is co-chair of the South Asia program of the East-West Institute. If he was forced out, he would not be allowed in the East-West.
But not more the president anymore.
No, the president is his deputy.
Huh?
Yeah.
No, but anyway, let's move forward on that. So, Jalsa, the last question, is it not, while we keep on talking of the pivot and everything, is it not a true thing, is it not reality that in the last 1 year, we have tried a level best to create a balance between Beijing and Washington? We have been desperate to get back into Washington.
If I may say, it could be the other way also. because there is an administration which is looking at the world in a different perspective. Mr. Trump believes in dollar influence rather than Apache influence. You know, he would prefer to have an influence in a country with greenbacks going or coming, preferably coming, but then some can go also. He is basically a businessman, and my opinion is that unless his hand is forced in his, at least this term, America will not go to war with any country, barring some, you know, this Saudi movement of couple of hundred troops.
So Trump wants to get back into Pakistan?
Trump is not interested in that manner in Pakistan. Let's be very frank about it. Nobody would be interested in anybody. They have all a larger perspective of things. So in that larger perspective of things, they would like also to have a balance. They would also not like to be in one camp. They have already committed in the Obama and his previous administration the strategic relationship with India. And Trump has come to realize, even the US State Department now realizes that totally shunning Pakistan and going to the new Indo-Pacific relationship has ultimately harmed the US interest in the region.
Okay.
So it's not love of Pakistan or hate of India that is happening. It is their own. Let's be very clear. Nobody loves or hates anybody in global politics. It is self-interest. So Americans now, you see, even on the Iranian issue, they would like to have a friendly Pakistan. Even on Afghan issue, they would like to have a friendly Pakistan. And we have proved now, and it's not last 1 year. Unfortunately, we are lumping it in the last 1 year. This was happening, or it is in transition for last 3-4 years. And as far as just at the last, about Russia-Pakistan relationship, I think we were dragging feet in the previous political administrations with the fear of United States going near Mr. Putin. I think now we are seeing a warming up of Russia-Pakistan relations, and it is always a counterweight to show to somebody that I am friends with another, you know, badmash in the mohalla.
Right.
So you better be careful.
So with this question, let's open it up for the audience. Kindly introduce yourself. Yes, the lady in the second row. Yeah, I'll come to everyone, but just quick. So I would request the volunteers, the coordinators, to keep on giving mic to the next person.
Is that on?
Yes.
Yes.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Bettina Robotka, and I'm from Germany, and I do know something also about Pakistan, and I'm interested, of course, in this discussion. And I'm trying now to formulate my remark as a question. Do you not... We are talking about the great game.
Your question is to whom?
They will decide. The great game. In the 19th century, the world was different. And the great game was about who will rule the world, England or Russia. Later, in the Cold War, the great game was about who will rule the world, communism or capitalism. But globalization hasn't globalization now reached, now comes the question, hasn't globalization reached a level where we cannot proceed against each other, but only together with each other? And I think this is something that the Chinese have known for centuries. You can find it in their philosophy and in their thinking, when you met them at the Karakoram Highway. This is something which is ingrained. It is not something that is a short term, even an hour or in there, but it's a long term, even in their temporal imagination. So I think the new, if you want to call it great game, is how to get the world forward together and not against each other. Would you...
Okay, so you want, this is a comment basically.
Yeah, I think that perhaps is the crux of the matter. Because if you look at it, Chinese do not have that sort of a relationship with India that they have with us. But look at the level of trade that they have with India. So that is pragmatism at its best. That despite the fact that in many places they have slapped India on the wrist as far as the Himalayas are concerned, particularly in Bhutan when they were trying to build this road, etc. But, and again now, at Article 370, when they brought Ladakh in, and they said, this is wrong, you cannot bring Ladakh, Ladakh is a disputed territory. So the point is very simple, that you are very correct. And that is what I think should be the crux and what we are saying. That the pivot is that we should take, and that is what General Yasin Malik has also said, that we should use this great opportunity to benefit from all sides, to make sure that we do not, like George Washington in his farewell speech as president said, do not make inveterate friends and do not make inveterate foes. That is the type of policy we should have. We have to have a pragmatic policy that makes sure that we do not have, enemy of an enemy is a friend type of thing. We have to make every single policy count towards only one subject, the national interest.
Next question, every single article that is coming out of China says that India is a natural partner in One Road, One Belt initiative. And 2 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, if you remember, they were even ready to change the name if India was to come on board. So yes, Dr. Batina, who's also, by the way, was my PhD supervisor, you're absolutely right.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Khalid Banuri. I'm a relevant head for this discussion. I'm visiting faculty at Qasim University. The question to the panel, it's straightforward and simple one. What is the capacity in Pakistan to maintain and, more importantly, sustain multidimensional relationships?
Jalsa, would you like to comment on that?
This is a diplomatic question you are asking to a soldier, but I think the question is very pertinent because of the political system present in Pakistan and the education system in Pakistan. It is not a sort of a mind-broadening system that is being followed in the educational institutions of Pakistan. Education per se has become a job-seeking or a bread earner, so to say. People are deciding the fields they have to go because of the pay that they would get or a job they would get here in Pakistan or abroad. So to develop that capacity, to have a multilateral relationship, you ought to have depth of perception. We lack that depth of perception because of lack of depth of intellect. So unless the nation gets out of this rigmarole of rote learning and these schools and institutions who are universities who are not producing the necessary intellectual depth. One point regarding Dr. Sahiba's question, I am not a pessimist, but my view is that as long as human beings are there, they will never be united. They will never be united. There will always be reasons and intrigues, to kick the other guy, to grab the interest, because it is all interest based.
Yes.
So the resources are so much in the world. So whether 10 countries enjoy it or 2 countries enjoy it, that's what it is.
The competition.
So that is my view.
Yes, Shankar.
Madam, my name
will you kindly stand up? Yeah, thank you.
My name is Arif. I am a government servant. Madam, you told that China is seeing CPEC as uplifting the Xinjiang and other provinces, the economic conditions of it. But there is a common perception that China has some more strategic interest than economic interest developing the border port.
Okay. Okay, let's take the mic back as well.
There's no doubt that China has strategic interests. Why would a country do the kind of investment that it is doing unless it was serving several purposes? So it has an internal dimension to it, and of course it has an external dimension to it. And like I said, that we keep talking about this investment in Pakistan. Look what they're doing in Africa. Look what they're doing in Europe. The game is much larger. The picture is much bigger.
Iran, for instance. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Moeed, my name is Tariq Fatmi. With your permission, instead of asking a question, if I may just make a few very brief comments. First of all, I'm in total sync with Dr. Huma Baqai's comments. I think she has explained very well. I would just like to add to all those who go around claiming that CPEC has brought us into a debt trap, or people who say that this is a unidimensional relationship. Please look at those who are the critics of CPEC. Why are the Americans suddenly so worried about the state of health of Pakistan? Why are two of our neighbors just a little distance away, who are brothers in faith with Pakistan, why have they become so critical of CPEC? It's a very simple question. Just think about it for a minute and you'll get the answer. And particularly Moeed will get the answer, because Moeed has been going around peddling this theory that CPEC is harmful to Pakistan. I want to tell you the element of debt is minuscule. Much of it is commercial. A second biggest section of that loan is on very, very attractive commercial terms. And then there is a small section which is pure grant. Now to the critics I want to ask, what was the option available to Pakistan? And Dr. Huma Baqai has very beautifully enumerated it. And lastly, what the General said is absolutely right. The relationship between states are built, constructed, and fortified only when both sides are winning. There is no such thing as passion. That may be true between you and I, but there is no such thing as passion or sentiment or emotion in interstate relationship. Pakistan-China relationship has prospered, I can tell you, from the many years that I have lived in that country, is based on convergence of interest. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Noid, you notice that you and I are not in Mr. Tariq Fatmi's good books.
No, Tariq Fatmi sir, thanks for such a comprehensive comment. But let me state, I'm doing a job of a moderator that whose responsibility is to stimulate and provoke different kind of responses. I'm not against CPEC.
We can understand.
In my television programs, I've never said the debt theory and the others. I think CPEC is a strategic investment, but it is also a fact that we're also trying to create a balance between Washington and Beijing, because we realize that we have to, and this is what I wanted to raise, that Washington remains important for us. For many reasons, it remains important for us. But let's take some questions from backside as well. Yes, yes, sir. Yeah. But then we must actually take the mic back as well, right?
Oh, short.
Yes, John.
Actually, I think in this very audience, I'd be the first one who has seen China since 1966, and I've seen I was in when the Cultural Revolution was at its peak, and I lived there for 6 months, and was responsible for sort of seeing to it that the Pakistan military gets its aid once the Americans had stopped it. And as I was supposed to be a sort of a specialist on tanks, so I stayed there, translated the Chinese, not that I knew Chinese, but with the help of the Chinese people, translated from Chinese all the documents and so on, and brought in the technology. That is not what I'm trying to say now. What I'm trying to say is, at that point of time, there were only 4 cars in Beijing. It was called Peking, and I was staying initially at the Peking Hotel, and there were only 4 foreigners, including me. And there were, in the entire country, there were only 16 foreigners. And I have never, 66. And then, since then, I have been to China several times, maybe about 30 to 40 times. I have never seen in the history of mankind a country turn so rapidly and transform itself what it did not do in 1,000 years. So there is a lesson. It's not so easy, what the Chinese have achieved. Now, coming to, that is one aspect of it. The other aspect is, as far as China and Pakistan are concerned, there is undoubtedly and clearly a convergence as far as their strategic interests are concerned, as far as their economic interests are concerned. And obviously, China is interested in Pakistan's stability, which of course is not as yet the level that it should be. So I think what we should look at, China in that sense that China is one of our closest friends, a close ally, but at the same time, it would be a great folly on our part if we think that we can only do with China, a country where there is so much of globalization, and the future is in globalization, irrespective of what President Trump is doing. I think we should continue to have the best of relations with the rest of the world, and especially America and the Western world, because they too have to offer so much to us.
I think we have only 3-4 minutes, so let's take 1 or 2 questions from there very quickly. Who has the mic behind there? Yes, who has the mic? Yeah. Yeah, please. Go ahead. Don't waste time. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Huma and I am a student of BSIR in National Defense University.
Yes.
We've been talking about the Chinese great game, and Jan Saab has been talking about the Chinese great game, and we have seen the revisionist tendencies in Washington's policy circles. How much room is there for China to propose an international political order that can actually challenge the centrality of dollar in national financial institutions? But also, we have been talking about neutrality, and we have seen that neutrality in Cold War during the time of non-alignment, where you've been using one power to have certain incentives from the other. But don't you think that the room for that neutrality would be greatly decreased if the Cold War sharpens, and the strategic maneuvering will be highly limited in that case when the rivalry sharpens between the two powers? Thank you.
Interesting question from a student who's going to respond to that.
Because it's from a student, I'll respond to it. And it's fairly simple. It's not about if it's going to be a dollar-driven war. It's going to be who holds more dollars. And today China holds more dollars. There are more dollars outside the United States than in the United States. The 2007 economic recession, China bailed out the Western world for its own economics to carry on the way it should. So like I said in the beginning, it is a crisscross of geoeconomics and geopolitics. Moreover, something Dr. Bettina pointed out here was that this time when the so-called Cold War unfolds, there is no ideological divide, so to say. And I don't even think China is looking for the kind of unipolarity or global leadership that US craves for. China is looking for something lot more than that. It is about convergence, it is about economic soft power, it is where the leadership role emerges by default and not by design. And that is what it's doing by perhaps replacing the United States in the climate change treaty, or now becoming a more important funder of the United Nations than the United States. I think those are the paradigm shifts that will determine the leadership, global leadership.
Okay, we have only 4 more minutes, so let's take 2 questions, one from here and one from somewhere.
Assalamu alaikum.
Who has the mic? Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sabur Ahmed. My question is for Ma'am Huma. As she said that China is investing in Pakistan when our economy is dwindling. But my question is that the 10% of the investment Pakistan is making for the great game of China, we have to give back their interest also. The China Central Development Bank, we have to give more interest than IMF. And for a country whose economy is dwindling, is it necessary to invest in the great game of someone else? We are withdrawing from the American great game and indulging ourselves in Chinese great game. And we are losing ourselves in playing it as a part of the other games.
Okay. Let's take a question over there. Yeah.
My name is Zubair Qureshi. I am from Pakistan Observer. My question is to Mr. Ikram Sehgal. When the nation is preparing for another heroic welcome to our Prime Minister who is on his way back to Pakistan, I want to ask if it is going to make any difference, because neither UN Secretary General nor US President, they don't seem to be buying our narrative, and they have not given any assurance. So what is going to be the fate of Kashmiris? Thank you.
What is going to talk about the fate of the Kashmiris? Yeah, who has the courage?
I think everybody who has seen Mr. Imran Khan's speech will agree that it was a great speech. And it did, and for the first time, we, with all respects to Mr. Tariq Fatmi here, we didn't have Maulana Fazlur Rahman as chairman of the Kashmir Committee, to be that. So the point is, you got a message across. Yes. What will be the effect of that speech? That effect of the speech will be sustained by what we do next. How we carry on, how our diplomatic corps sustains that, how our media sustains that, how we can get the message across into every country of the world. I have been suggesting time and again. I have said there are many retired ambassadors who have worked in these countries. People like Mr. Tariq Fatmi, people like Ambassador Arif Kamal, people like, I can name hundreds of them here. Send them back to those countries
where they had served.
Where they served. So they can talk to the people that they knew, the contacts in the media, the public sector, the civil society, etc. So they can take Pakistan's point of view and take this great speech and make sure that it's sustained. Because if you do not sustain it, then it'd be like one swallow does not make a spring. All right? And this is what's going to happen. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I may respond to this boy here, this young student, देखो बेटा, जब मकान की छत में छेद हो जाता है ना, और पानी आने लगता है तो पूरा मकान नहीं गिराते ना, उस छेद को सही करते हैं, उस सुराख को फिल करते हैं. चाइना हमें बहुत सारी चीज़ें दे रहा है, हो सकता है उसमें मसाइल हों. ओवरऑल सूरत हाल अच्छी है, उस मसले को हल कर लेते हैं जो आपने बताया.
One comment regarding the Prime Minister, because our time is finished, so we would not be able to take any more questions. The Prime Minister of Pakistan was not expecting any dramatic results at the United Nations General Assembly. No one in his team, no sane person, no realistic person was expecting black and white or a dramatic development taking place. The point was that Pakistan had to put forward Kashmir's case and Pakistan's case in front of the world, which in 5 days, when you look at the hyperactivity of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, 28 sessions and meetings. New York Times board, Wall Street Journal board, he was talking to Amnesty International, he met the Prime Ministers, the head of the states, the OIC, the talk of an English channel, and we are also talking to our sources on the other side in Kashmir and in India, and we know for this that the Modi regime is unable to implement whatever they wanted to implement because of the pressure and because of the focus in which the occupied Jammu and Kashmir is at the moment. So it is for us to continue the focus and to expose. I mean, if you look at the kind of response which the Indian mission at the UN General Assembly has responded, everyone has seen that, we have seen that, it's lame duck. They're unable to talk of Kashmir. They only say one single line, it's an internal matter, they're still talking of the same thing. So it is the first time that the Pakistani side has put India under pressure. Whether President Trump can say it or not, it's a huge achievement in the past couple of weeks. Thank you so much for all.
I just want to add one thing in the response. The most pathetic thing they said in the response was, they said this is Mr. Imranullah Khan Niazi, who is related to Lieutenant General Niazi. Can you imagine? They're trying to correct that thing, etc. This was most pathetic. They came across nothing else to respond.
It was a very weak response, but thank you so much for all your participation. A big clap for the panel over here. Thank you so much for the panel as well. It was a very interesting, provocative discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you.